The day my son looked at me across that conference table and said, "Mom, we're just trying to protect you," I almost laughed out loud. Almost. I've heard that line before. 31 years in the U.S. Marshal Service teaches you something about the way people use concern as a weapon. The softer the voice, the more carefully you should watch the hands. But I didn't laugh. I folded my hands in my lap, the same way I used to sit across from suspects in interview rooms in Memphis and later in Phoenix. And I nodded slowly and I said, "I know you are, sweetheart." His wife Diane touched his arm and gave me the smile she always gave me, the one that never quite reached her eyes. I noticed that the first time we met. I should back up. My name is Dorothy Elaine Waverly. I'm 67 years old. I live in the same house in Tucson, Arizona that my late husband Robert and I bought in 1989. A 3-bedroom adobe with a yard full of saguaro cacti and a back porch where I used to grade papers after I retired the first time. I say the first time because I've had 2 careers, and most people only know about one of them. The one most people know, I taught high school history for 11 years in Memphis, Tennessee. I was good at it. My students called me Mrs. W because Waverly was too many syllables before their morning coffee. The one most people don't know, after Robert got his federal posting in Phoenix, and we relocated, I spent 3 decades as a deputy U.S. Marshal. Fugitive apprehension, witness protection coordination, court security. I retired as a senior inspector in 2018, which is the quiet title they give you when you've done things that don't get put in press releases. My colleagues called me the Librarian because I looked like one, they said. Sensible cardigan, reading glasses on a beaded chain, comfortable shoes. Nobody runs from a librarian. Nobody watches what they say around a librarian. That was, professionally speaking, my greatest asset. My son Nathan is 41. He's a good-looking man. He got Robert's jaw and my eyes, and he works in commercial real estate in Scottsdale. He met Diane at a conference in Las Vegas 4 years ago. They married 8 months later. I flew out for the wedding. I smiled in all the pictures. I wore the blue dress Nathan said Diane had specifically approved. That was my first indication that something was off. Not a red flag, exactly. More like a slightly unusual smell that you file away and don't mention at a dinner party. Diane is 34. She's originally from somewhere in Ohio. She's mentioned different cities at different times, which I also filed away. She's pretty in a deliberate way, the way people are pretty when they've worked at it and they want you to know it. She laughs at Nathan's jokes a beat too late, as if she's calculating the appropriate response. She calls me Dorothy instead of anything warmer, which is her right, but she says it the way you'd say the name on a form you're filling out. For the first year of their marriage, I told myself I was being an overprotective mother-in-law, a judgmental old woman who couldn't accept that her son had his own life. I went to therapy. I'm a big believer in therapy, always have been, and I worked on it. I genuinely tried. Then things started to change. It started small, the way it always does. Nathan called me in the spring of last year, which was unusual because we usually texted. He sounded strange on the phone, too casual, the way people sound when they've rehearsed being casual. "Hey, Mom, so Diane and I were talking. We're a little worried about you over there by yourself. I was sitting on my back porch watching a roadrunner pick its way through the gravel." "I'm fine," I said. "What specifically worries you?" "Well, you know, you're not getting any younger." He paused. "And the house is a lot to manage alone. The house is 1,840 square feet. I mow my own lawn, maintain my own gutters, and last fall I regrouted the master bathroom tile myself because the contractor quoted me $400 and I had a Saturday free. The house is fine, I said. I'm fine. Right, of course. Diane mentioned she thought you seemed a little scattered the last time we visited. That visit had been 2 months before. I had made chicken piccata from scratch and correctly identified the capital of Mauritania when it came up in a trivia game after dinner. I had not seemed scattered. I had been sharper than anyone else at that table, which was perhaps, in retrospect, the problem. I didn't say any of that, I said. Tell Diane I appreciate her concern, and changed the subject. But after I hung up, I sat with the Roadrunner for a while and I thought. Over the next 3 months, the calls continued, each one a variation on a theme. Had I remembered to renew my car registration? Did I know that my neighbor Harold's wife had moved to a memory care facility? Wasn't it hard to keep track of so many financial accounts at my age? My age. I was 66. My mother, God rest her, taught aerobics until she was 72. Then came the visit. Nathan and Diane drove down from Scottsdale on a Sunday in July. Diane brought a casserole, which she had never done before. She also brought, tucked under her arm like it was nothing, a manila folder. We ate lunch, we talked about the heat. Diane admired my kitchen in the specific way people admire things they are measuring. After the dishes, Nathan set the manila folder on the table. "Mom," he said, "we've been doing some research about estate planning." I looked at the folder. Then I looked at him. "I have an estate plan," I said. "I've had one since 1997. Paul Ingram at Ingram & Associates did it. It's been updated 3 times. Right, but Nathan glanced at Diane. Things are complicated now. The house alone has appreciated a lot, and I just think, it would give us all peace of mind if we had a more current arrangement. Something where Diane and I could help manage things, if something happened." Diane smiled. "It's just so much easier on everyone when these things are organized ahead of time," she said. "We love you and we just want to be prepared." There it was. That word. Prepared. I looked at the folder. I looked at my son. I thought about 31 years of reading rooms, reading faces, reading the pauses between sentences. "Let me look this over," I said pleasantly. "I'll want to talk to Paul before I sign anything." Something moved across Diane's face. It was very fast, and she covered it immediately with another smile. But I'd spent 3 decades not blinking in moments other people looked away, and I caught it. It was irritation. I called Paul Ingram the next morning. He's been my attorney since Robert was alive, and I trust him about as much as I trust anyone in a profession that requires trust. I described what Nathan had presented. Paul was quiet for a moment. "Dorothy," he said carefully, "what exactly were they asking you to sign?" "A durable power of attorney, broad financial scope, and something called a trust amendment that would move management authority to Nathan and his wife." Another pause. Did they bring their own documentation, or did they mention a specific attorney? They had their own documents. I didn't recognize the letterhead. "Okay," Paul said. "Don't sign anything. Bring me the copies they left and we'll go through them together." I already knew what I was going to do, but it was good to have Paul confirm the direction. Here is what I did not do: panic, cry, confront Nathan directly. Any of the things a woman my age was perhaps expected to do. Here is what I did do. I went to my study, opened the drawer in my desk that Nathan has never asked about because it looks like it contains only utility bills and appliance warranties, and I took out the notebook I have kept since 1991. Every investigator has a system. Mine involves a standard black and white composition notebook, a mechanical pencil, and the discipline to write down only what I have actually observed, not what I have concluded. Conclusions come later. Facts first. I started a new page. I wrote down everything I remembered about the past 3 months. The calls, the phrasing, the visit, the folder, the document details, Diane's expression when I said I'd talk to my attorney. I wrote down the name on the letterhead, a law firm in Scottsdale I didn't recognize. I wrote down the specific language from the power of attorney, which I had photographed on my phone before they left. Then I started asking questions in the way I know how to ask them, which is quietly, indirectly, and with patience. I called a friend named Beverly who used to work financial crimes for the Arizona Attorney General's office and now consults. I didn't tell her why I was asking. I asked her, hypothetically, what she knew about a particular Scottsdale attorney whose name appeared on estate planning documents that seemed aggressively written. Beverly was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then she said, "Dorothy, where did you come across this name? Why?" "Because that firm has been flagged twice in the last 18 months. Both cases involved adult children and elderly parents. Both involved the parents signing over broad financial authority. In one case, a $340,000 investment account was liquidated within 60 days of the documents being executed." I wrote that down. "The cases didn't go anywhere procedurally," Beverly continued, "because in both instances the parents had signed willingly, or at least they said they had by the time anyone looked into it." "What about the adult children? Were they aware of the pattern?" "Unknown in both cases. Could have been aware, could have been used. These things aren't always clear." I thought about my son's face at that Sunday lunch, the way he looked at Diane before he spoke, the way he looked at her after, checking her expression the way you check a map when you're not sure you're on the right road. Could have been aware, could have been used. I wrote both possibilities in my notebook. I didn't cross either one out. Over the following 6 weeks, I was methodical. I opened a separate checking account at a different bank, one Nathan had no knowledge of, and I began quietly shifting a portion of my liquid assets. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger concern, just enough to make sure that the accounts Nathan knew about contained considerably less than their usual balance. I also updated my actual estate documents with Paul, new will, updated beneficiary designations, a properly constructed trust that did not include Diane or Nathan in any management capacity, with a colleague from my Marshal's days named Victor as backup trustee. Victor lives in Albuquerque and is not a man whose arm anyone has ever successfully twisted. I continued taking my son's calls. I continued being pleasant. I said things like, "I'm thinking it over," and "you might be right about getting organized," and "Diane does have a good point about the house." I let them believe the door was still open. Meanwhile, I was looking very carefully at Diane, not because I wanted to confirm my worst suspicions, because I needed to know, one way or another, whether my son was a victim or a participant. That mattered to me. That mattered more than the money. Beverly sent me something in September. A property record search she'd run as a favor. Diane, her full legal name, was Diane Patricia Holloway, which was not the name she'd given Nathan when they met, which he didn't know because he hadn't asked, which is the kind of thing that happens when you're 41 and in love and not running background checks on your dates, had been married before. Twice. Her first husband, an older man in Columbus, Ohio, had died of a cardiac event at 68, 2 years into the marriage. He had updated his estate documents 6 months before his death. His children from his first marriage had contested the will. The case was settled quietly out of court. Her second husband, a retired surgeon in Flagstaff, Arizona, and I had to sit down when I read this, because Flagstaff is 40 minutes from where I'm writing this, had divorced her after 14 months. The divorce filing cited financial misconduct. He had not pursued criminal charges. He had, according to Beverly's source, simply wanted her gone. That marriage had ended 2 years before Diane met Nathan in Las Vegas. I sat on my back porch for a long time after I read that. The sun went down. The air cooled off the way it does in Tucson in September. That particular relief that feels like the whole desert exhaling. I thought about my son, his father's jaw, my eyes. He had no idea. I was nearly certain of that now. Nearly. I needed one more piece. The piece came in October from an unexpected direction. I have a neighbor named Connie, 72, who walks her dog past my house every morning at 7. We've had coffee on my porch hundreds of times over the years. Connie is sharp, funny, and has the particular gift of the longtime neighborhood resident, which is that she remembers everything and talks to everyone. In October, Connie mentioned, over coffee, that she'd met a woman at her book club who had an interesting story. An older woman, retired teacher, Connie said, 74, living out on the east side, who had recently transferred financial management authority to her nephew and his girlfriend, and then found that her brokerage account had been partially liquidated, small amounts at first, then less small. The woman hadn't gone to the police. She was embarrassed. She felt responsible. I asked Connie if she could introduce me. Her name was Joyce. She met me for lunch at a diner near her house on a Tuesday. She was a small woman with careful eyes and the slight stiffness of someone who had been hurt and was still deciding how much to trust the world afterward. I told Joyce who I was. Not a neighbor. A retired U.S. Marshal with 31 years of experience and a very specific reason for wanting to hear her story. Joyce looked at me for a long moment. Then she started talking. The nephew's girlfriend had used an attorney in Scottsdale. The same firm name I'd written in my notebook 2 months before. We sat in that diner for 2 hours. When we were done, Joyce said, "What do we do now?" "You don't do anything yet," I told her. "You let me make a phone call." I called Beverly that afternoon. Beverly called someone she knew at the Arizona Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit. That person called me back directly the following morning, at 8 o'clock sharp, which I appreciated because I have always respected people who return calls promptly. I spent 45 minutes on the phone with an investigator named Sandra, who asked very good questions and took thorough notes, and who said at the end of our conversation, with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned not to make promises, "Mrs. Waverly, this is very useful. We're going to need you to be patient." "I've been patient," I said, "for 31 years. I can manage a little longer." The investigation that followed was not mine to run. I know how to step back. I've done it before, on cases where the jurisdictional boundaries required it. You hand off what you have, you trust the people across the table, and you wait. But I did ask Sandra one question before we hung up. "Do you need me to do anything specifically on my end? To keep things moving?" She thought about it. "Actually," she said, "yes. We'd like to get a full picture before we move. Is there any way you could, without raising suspicion, agree to a meeting? Something formal where documents might be signed?" I looked at my notebook. I thought about the manila folder on my kitchen table, the irritation on Diane's face. "I believe," I said, "I can arrange that." I called Nathan that evening. "I've been thinking," I told him, "about what you and Diane suggested in July. I think you're right. It would give me peace of mind to get things in order." The relief in his voice was immediate and real. There was something in it that told me what I needed to know about how much pressure he'd been under. That's the thing about voices. They carry things people don't mean to send. "Mom, that's great. I'll talk to Diane and we'll set something up. Tell her I'd like to do it properly," I said. "At the attorney's office. I want everything official." Of course, Nathan said. Absolutely. 3 weeks later, we had a date. A conference room at the Scottsdale firm. 11 in the morning on a Tuesday in November. Nathan, Diane, the attorney, and me. I told Paul Ingram. I called Beverly. I texted Sandra a single message. Tuesday, November 18th, 11 a.m. Firm address attached. She texted back, "We'll be ready." I dressed carefully that morning. I wear what I've always worn, neutral colors, comfortable shoes, the reading glasses on the beaded chain. I look like someone's grandmother. I look like a woman who makes casseroles and worries about her blood pressure and might, under the right circumstances, sign something she doesn't fully understand. Robert used to say my greatest professional skill was that I looked exactly like what people assumed I was, right up until the moment it became very clear that I was not. I thought about Robert on the drive up to Scottsdale. I thought about the 31 years I had spent doing a job most people never knew I was doing. I thought about Nathan and hoped that what I believed about him was true. I walked into the conference room at 11:02. Nathan and Diane were already seated. The attorney, a man named Grayson, late 50s, the kind of tan you get from golf rather than work, stood to greet me with the particular warmth that professionals deploy when they need you to feel comfortable. Nathan stood too. He hugged me. Over his shoulder, I looked at Diane. She was watching me with those careful eyes, measuring still, calculating what kind of woman I was. I smiled at her. She smiled back. We sat down. Grayson began going through the documents. The same documents, essentially, that Nathan had brought to my kitchen in July, with a few additions: the power of attorney, the trust amendments, a form authorizing Diane and Nathan as co-managers of my primary investment account, held at Fidelity, which currently showed a balance of approximately $42,000. It had held considerably more than that in July. The difference was now in accounts that no one in this room had any knowledge of and would not. I asked questions. Slow, careful questions, the kind an elderly woman might ask because she wasn't quite following. Grayson answered them with the smooth patience of a man who had done this before. Nathan watched me with an expression that mixed love and something anxious underneath it. Something I'd been turning over in my mind for weeks. Diane looked at her phone once, put it away. Then the conference room door opened. Sandra walked in, and behind her 2 other people I did not recognize but whose professional posture I recognized immediately, the way you always recognize it once you've worn it yourself. Grayson's face changed. Nathan looked confused. "Mom?" "What?" I put my hand on his arm. "Just wait," I said quietly. "Let them talk." Sandra identified herself. She introduced her colleagues. She said several things to Grayson in the careful, specific language of someone who has prepared a statement and is delivering it precisely. She referenced case numbers and a warrant. She placed a document on the table in front of Grayson, who looked at it and then looked at me with an expression I had seen before, across many tables, in many rooms. The expression of a person who has just understood that they have badly miscalculated. Diane stood up. "I need to call my attorney," she said. "You're welcome to do that," Sandra said. "We do want to let you know that your attorney, Mr. Grayson, is currently not in a position to represent you. You may want to call someone else." There was a long silence. I watched my son during that silence. I watched his face move through several things in quick succession. Confusion. Then a sharper attention. Then a realization that arrived slowly and then all at once, the way realizations do when you've been not seeing something for a long time. He looked at Diane. She was staring at the table. He looked at me. I looked back at him. I didn't say anything. I just let him see my face, and I think what he saw was something he'd been not quite seeing for a while, that I was not who he'd been letting himself believe I was lately. His mother who needed managing, his mother who was getting older and needed protecting, just his mother, who had 31 years of very specific experience that she had not found it necessary to mention until now. We sat in my car in the parking garage afterward, Nathan and I. Diane had left in her own car, briefly and without many words. We would find out later what the investigation ultimately concluded about each of them. Nathan sat in the passenger seat and looked at his hands for a long time. "Mom," he finally said, "how long did you know?" "Since the Sunday in July when you put that folder on my kitchen table." He closed his eyes. "The Marshals," he said. 31 years. 31 years. And I was. He stopped, pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose. "I was trying to protect you." "I know," I said. "I think part of you genuinely was. I also think you were under a great deal of pressure from someone who was very skilled at applying it." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Then Dad knew about your career. Your father knew everything." He was very proud. I paused. He also thought it was funny that nobody could ever tell. Nathan laughed once, a short sound that wasn't entirely a laugh. He looked out the windshield at the concrete of the parking garage. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know you are. I should have seen it." "She's very good at what she does," I said, "and you loved her. Those two things together are a difficult combination to see through. Believe me, I've watched it happen to people a great deal more professionally suspicious than you." He turned and looked at me then, really looked at me, in the way he used to when he was small and had done something wrong and was trying to figure out whether I was angry or just tired. "Are you angry?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. "Not at you," I said. "Not anymore." We sat there for a while longer. Outside, Scottsdale was going about its business. Somewhere below us, Sandra and her colleagues were going about theirs. The work of untangling what Diane Patricia Holloway had built, and for how long, and for how many people. Joyce would be getting a phone call. Beverly had already sent me a text. The sun came through the parking garage and slanted lines and made patterns on the dashboard. "Come home with me," I said finally. "I'll make dinner. We have a lot of talking to do, and we should probably do it where there are leftovers." Nathan looked at me for a moment. Something in his face shifted into something younger and less defended. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." I started the car. They forgot so often that the women who look like librarians are the ones who have quietly read everything in the building. They forgot that patience is not passivity. They forgot that the person across the table who is nodding thoughtfully may be the most dangerous person in the room. They forgot about me. By the time they remembered, it was already done. People ask me sometimes if I feel sorry for Diane. It's a fair question. I've thought about it more than you might expect. What I keep coming back to is this: Diane made choices, specific, deliberate choices over a long period of time that caused real harm to real people. Joyce and the others before her, and nearly me. She was skilled at it, and skill requires practice, and practice requires repetition. That's not circumstance. That's character, built over years, decision by decision. I don't believe people are simply born one way or another. I do believe that every time you choose the easier wrong over the harder right, you make the next wrong choice slightly easier. That's not a religious idea. That's just what I've watched happen to people across 31 years of work. The first lie is the hardest. By the 100th, you don't notice you're lying at all. That's what Diane had become by the time she sat across from me in that conference room in Scottsdale. Not a monster, a person who had chosen so many times to take what wasn't hers from people she'd calculated couldn't fight back that she had genuinely stopped seeing anything wrong with it. The most dangerous people I ever encountered in my career weren't the violent ones. They were the ones who had talked themselves into believing they were reasonable. And Nathan, my son, who I love without conditions and will love until I'm not here to do it anymore. What about him? Nathan isn't stupid. He's not weak. He's someone who wanted something. Love, partnership, a life that felt full, and found someone who was very good at offering exactly that, at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right language. That's not naivety. That's being human. What I've had to sit with is the harder truth, that I didn't give him enough of myself for him to recognize the counterfeit when it showed up. I kept my career so private for so many years, for reasons that made professional sense and perhaps less personal sense than I told myself. My son didn't know who I really was. That's not entirely Diane's fault. We've talked about that. Nathan and I. More honestly than we've talked about most things, actually. There's something that gets cleared away when a crisis passes. The polite distance, the careful topics, and what's left is just two people who need each other and finally know it. What I hope anyone takes from this, if they take anything at all, is something simpler than a lesson. It's more of an observation. The people who underestimated me, Diane, Grayson, everyone in that room who looked at a 67-year-old woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain and saw someone manageable, they weren't wrong to look. They were wrong to stop there. Assumptions are a form of laziness, and laziness, in my experience, is where most people get caught. I spent 31 years being invisible because I looked like what people expected. I never corrected them. I just kept my notebook and my patience and my contacts, and I waited for the moment when all three of those things would be necessary. The moment always comes. That's the other thing I know. If you do the quiet work, if you stay sharp, stay honest, stay connected to people worth trusting, the moment always comes. You just have to be ready when it does, and willing to act when it's time, and clear-eyed enough to know the difference between the two. I made dinner that evening. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the green beans Nathan has liked since he was 7. We sat at my kitchen table and talked until almost midnight. It was a beginning. Those are harder to come by than people think, and worth more than almost anything else I know of.